Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lara Merling, and I am a policy advisor at the International Trade Union Confederation. And I'm very happy to be here chairing the session one day ahead of World Day of Decent Work. And this event, the Global Forum on Democratizing Work, is taking place on the 10-year anniversary of Decent Work Day. And it's also in the aftermath of a pandemic that has been devastating to working people, where millions have lost their jobs and millions have lost their lives and hundreds of millions have lost their jobs. So for trade unions and the ITUC, the World Day of Decent Work tomorrow is all about jobs. Jobs that are climate friendly, jobs that are inclusive, jobs that come with rights, and jobs that build resilience. And we've also been calling for a new social contract with rights, social protection, and inclusion, and have been demanding that governments step up and put forward plans for job creation. And these goals are very aligned with the demands of this forum to democratize, decommodify, and decarbonize. And we've seen that the reliance on market mechanisms has failed to deliver not only on full employment, but also left us vulnerable and unable to cope with a pandemic that showed how fragile our systems are. But even before the pandemic, governments had lost sight of full employment as a goal, and also generally accepted this idea that full employment still means that there must be some natural rate of unemployment and having some sort of reserve army unemployed for stability. And then despite having in place a system where some people had to be unemployed, we often see people blaming those without jobs for not having jobs. And the right to work, free choice of employment, and favorable conditions of work is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the job guarantee is a proposal on how we could deliver on that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists about the job guarantee and how it would deliver on the demands of workers and trade unions as well for a new social contract and full employment, and also how this can help guide a just transition to a green and digital economy. And I'm very happy to say we'll be able to hear perspectives on this from both the global north and the global south. Our first speaker is Lukas Lehner. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford and has previously worked as an economist for the OECD and the ILO. And Lukas will talk a bit about this pilot example happening in Austria and Marienthal with a job guarantee. So Lukas, can you tell us a little bit more about the principles around which a job guarantee program should be designed, and how can we see if it's having an impact?
Thank you for the kind introduction, Lara. I'm just going to share my screen for that. And as you mentioned, I will just briefly present the outline of what to contextualize our job guarantee pilot, and then talk a little bit about the pilot that is being conducted in Marienthal in Austria, which is very small, but which has a rigorous research design to evaluate the effects on participants and on the wider communities. And all this, what I'm going to present, is joint work with Maximilian Kasi, who's a professor at the economics department at the University of Oxford. Let me jump into it. Just very briefly to say that job guarantee, which is debated a lot in the recent years and which has received increasing attention, is not necessarily a new or never tried idea. There have been several examples of job guarantee programs in history. Very prominently, for instance, in the United States during the New Deal. Also, the Argentinian example is very, very famous. And still continuing today. The largest such project in India, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, but there are also other prominent examples in Western countries of the global north, and the largest, most prominent one is the one in France, the Territoire Zéro Chômeur de Longue Durée, which I'm very much looking forward to hear from Laurent in a few moments. And there is also a smaller project in Berlin taking place, which I think could be compared to it, which is an income that is linked to some participation in society. So what do we expect from a job guarantee? Well, on the one hand, it is an important unconditional outside option for those that are usually the worst off in our society and have the weakest bargaining position. It is so in employment towards employers, and that's very obvious, but it is also towards state bureaucracies, and even in private relationships, especially romantic relationships, where some people may be forced to stay in a relationship where they cannot leave because they cannot afford it. And so a job guarantee can offer an unconditional outside option to people in many dimensions, in employment, towards state bureaucracies, but also in private relationships. It's also an important aspect that it aims to cover uncovered populations, dropping conditionalities and means testing from our welfare state and unemployment system, which should lead to reduce the problem of non-benefit take-up. But also from a macroeconomic perspective, job guarantee can be an automatic stabilizer, right, to smooth the business cycle and individual consumption as well. And there is important work on that by several people presenting at this conference, including Pavlina Tcherneva. And it is important on the macroeconomic side to smooth the business cycle, but also on the individual level, it can help to smooth individual consumption and disposable income. So work is not, and that's what I'm getting asked often in discussions about basic income, job guarantee. Is it a contradiction or is it complementary? Well, work in our society is much more than an income, right? The society we live in currently, work fulfills a lot of additional functions, and that is, it provides to people a collective purpose, a source of meaning in life, social inclusion, a higher status, activity, and the time structure of the day. Usually we divide our days in work time and spare time, right? So work regulates our time, which all may get lost if people are in unemployment. And of course, the income perspective, the financial strain is important as well. So I will just spend 2 more minutes to talk about the Marienthal Job Guarantee Pilot, which is a small project that was a small pilot project that was launched by the Public Employment Service in Lower Austria in a town called Marienthal that became famous already 90 years ago through the famous Marienthal study. That was one of the pioneering social research, empirical social research projects where an unemployed community was studied. Now we're gonna reverse the kind of what we are going to study, because now we are going to study how employment affects unemployed. And there is a budget of around 7.5 million euros for a project for 3.5 years. And what is specific to it is that everyone who has been unemployed for longer than 12 months is eligible to participate and gets offered a job. And that differs drastically from other public employment projects that exist in many countries, because usually it's not an unconditional guarantee where really everyone is eligible. And that also allows us to study how the effects are on everyone representatively and of one local population, of course, in a small town, contrary to selection effects, where only specific people get to participate. Now, very central, and I just want to highlight 3 elements of the job guarantee, is that participation is entirely voluntary. There are no sanctions for declining a job offer. That was also very important for us to engage in this research project. Second, it's a real job, a work contract with a collectively bargained wage, right? It's not continuing to receive benefits while doing work. It's not a workfare program. It's a job guarantee. So there is a collectively bargained wage that is above the minimum wage level. And there is also the third aspect that we believe it's very important that the tasks are actually meaningful employment. That's perhaps one of the biggest challenges as well when thinking about extending such job guarantee projects to wider communities, to ensure that the tasks that are being done are actually meaningful in two ways. First, for the participants who work, for the workers, that they perceive it as something actually meaningful and not as something just to fill their time. Second, that it's also meaningful to the wider communities in providing some social, ecologically useful contribution. So in the Marienthal job guarantee pilot, what I believe is really critical is the preparatory phase. So for the first 2 months before being offered a job, unemployed are actually taking part in an active labor market training program where they get very individually targeted counseling. And that takes place already at the main site where they get offered a job later on in a newly created social enterprise. And in this training program, there are different pillars. One of them is focusing on the health of participants, because it needs to be made sure that people are actually unemployed, long-term unemployed, are actually in a situation where they can still work. And some of them maybe not, and then they will be supported to receive health benefits, for example, and move to the adequate system of, for example, incapacity retirement. Second, they are supported to strengthen their skills, soft skills, and specific job skills. And they are also taking part in plannings of their future, where the participants themselves develop already some of the ideas that are later being transformed to projects that job guarantee workers work on. So we believe that it's not our job to come from Oxford or wherever and tell the people what is most useful to do in their communities, but we think that there is a lot of useful local knowledge available with the people in their communities. And so they take part in workshops where they figure out what may be the most useful thing to do and to contribute in their community, and what is possible and feasible also with the skills and resources available. Well, and lastly, of course, job guarantee participants are also supported still to find other jobs outside of the job guarantee if they like to, and there have been several job guarantee workers are also transitioning to other jobs as well. So I want to emphasize that this is not the ultimate purpose, that everyone has to transition to another job. It's absolutely fine and a success if people improve their situation within the job guarantee, but still moving to an outside job is something, if people aspire so, are very much supported as well to do so. And just before finishing up my introductory statement, I want to tell you what are the jobs that are actually being done, how does it play out in practice. As I said, the jobs are individually tailored and several options are available in a newly founded social enterprise. Some include, for instance, carpentry and renovation work, so more on the manual side of labor. Others include public gardening, but also social services, such as a support for elderly in the community. It's not exactly care work, but it's support with daily activities of elderly people in the community, which is something that seems to be a strong need in our communities, but no real supply there in meeting these needs and demands for assisting elderly in their daily lives. And with demographic change, this is of course an increasing important topic. But also several projects were created by the ideas of participants, such as planning a bike trail that connects different towns in the region, or establishing a book or a digital library, so-called topothek, on the village itself. So some participants are working on these projects as well. And of course, as I said, participants are also supported to take up jobs in the regular labor market, and these are also subsidized for a temporary period in time. And I think I'm gonna stop here, and if there are questions also, I'm sure I get later the opportunity to also tell you more about our research design and the first results that we got on where the job guarantee helps to affect and improve some aspects such as health, social inclusion, finances, and also which areas we don't see results yet.
Thank you very much, Lukas. It's very exciting to see this pilot that is actually making the idea a reality, and to hear that also you have these locally designed jobs that people are also excited enough to propose their own projects, and it's helping the long-term unemployed. And now, staying in the global north and the long-term unemployed, we have our second speaker, Laurent Grandguillaume, who is the current president of the French Foundation Territory Zero Long-Term Unemployment and a former member of the French Parliament. And Laurent, can you tell you more from your perspective, how is the job guarantee helping reach this goal of zero long-term unemployment?
Thank you. I have begun to carry this project of economic, social, and ecological transformation as a deputy in the French Parliament, and I then choose to continue this fight in the civil society as a voluntary president of the NGO Territories Without Long-Term Unemployed. 5 years ago, I would not have been able to imagine that this utopia would become real, an experiment which is now taking place in 10 territories in France. Unemployment finds its roots in economic inequalities, transportation inequalities, knowledge inequalities, and territorial inequalities. To me, unemployment is not a choice. That's why we speak about people deprived of job rather than of unemployed people. The principle of this project is simple: create or learn on companies of the social sector to create permanent employment contracts paid in the guaranteed minimum wage. It's simple. These jobs are funded by reorienting the cost of the hardship of employment towards the financing of a local economy. The activities answer territories' real needs, not yet satisfied because little solvent. They come in supplement of existing activities, and no account they have to compete with the existing companies present in the labor pool. It is the project. Territories can offer their own answers to long-term unemployment. To be effective, the solutions have to meet the needs in the territory. They must be suited and piloted at a local level. It is a guarantee, unemployment guarantee in this solution. You want an addition of explication?
Well, we can just leave it here and then see what questions people have afterwards. But thank you for sharing that. And it sounds, congratulations on the work you're doing. And it sounds like it's been an exciting journey for you. And now that we've heard about these two projects in the global north, we're going to shift the perspective a bit and go to the global south experience. And have our third speaker, Fadhel Kaboub. He's a professor at Denison University and the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Development. Fadhel, can you tell us what's the potential for a job guarantee in the context of global south is, and how can it in that context help address the issues of informality and underemployment?
Thank you. Well, very good question, and thank you again for the wonderful introduction and for the insightful comments about the experiences in Europe in terms of piloting job guarantee programs. Well, as Lukas and Laurent have suggested, the job guarantee program is really designed to be a complement to what the private sector is unable to do or unwilling to do, but also what the mainline government sector is unable to do or to deliver. So it's not meant to replace the private sector or the government sector. However, in the context of the Global South, the economic structure itself is very different, obviously, than European economies. So I would like to start by identifying some key structural weaknesses or deficiencies that we see in the Global South that can be corrected via a job guarantee program. Most developing countries structurally suffer from a massive amount of external debt. And the root cause of that external debt is trade deficits that can be traced to three major deficiencies, economic deficiencies. Number one, the lack of food security. A huge portion of the trade deficit is typically food imports. Number two, a huge amount of that trade deficit, which translates into external debt, is lack of energy. So energy imports, fossil fuels in particular. And then the third structural deficiency that you don't experience in the global north, for example, which is a type of industrialization that has set up a trap for developing countries over the last 50 years or so. Industrial policies that tended to force developing countries to specialize in low value added content of manufacturing. So you end up importing high value added content and exporting low value added content. So no matter how fast you export, you're always trapped in that situation. So you have these three structural deficiencies that no developing country can escape the poverty trap, so to speak, without addressing them directly. The problem is standard market mechanisms that we've been using for decades tend to reinforce and reproduce those deficiencies as opposed to solving them, which is why you keep seeing the external debt problem getting worse and worse over time. So how can we use a job guarantee program to set a developing country on a track to close those deficiencies and move forward towards resilience and prosperity? So in the standard job guarantee literature, we always talk about the job guarantee as that third component of the economy, in addition to what the private sector does, both for-profit and non-profit. In addition to mainline government jobs, we have the job guarantee as a buffer stock mechanism, as the final component of guaranteeing a full employment economy. In the Global South, we have to be careful with the nuance here, because we have to recognize that to some extent, mainline government employment is lacking, is not sufficient to provide basic services. So you can introduce a job guarantee program on two tracks, so to speak. Some of the jobs will become mainline government programs permanently once we recognize that they're needed on a permanent basis. But the final component will be a job guarantee program that would operate similarly to what we see what we would see in a global north country. So the job guarantee program can be used as a platform to reorient the economic structure of a country in the global south by targeting specifically the food security sector, the renewable energy security sector, and by building the skills and nudging the manufacturing sector to move towards higher value-added content of manufacturing. And of course, for that, you need investment in education and technical training and public health and infrastructure and all of that. So those become mainline government employments, but they're targeted not to support foreign direct investment, not to support any kind of export-oriented manufacturing, but towards supporting specific strategies that will allow you to build resilience over time. I'll give you an example, and maybe we'll move on to a conversation and Q&A after this. Just to illustrate, Tourism, for example, which many countries in the global south see as a key engine of their economic development because it creates a lot of jobs and it brings foreign currency reserves, which are needed to pay external debt, to import capital, and so on. So it's often viewed as the industry that the government must support at any cost. But it turns out if you are a country that doesn't have food security, that imports a lot of food and imports a lot of energy, when you bring millions of tourists, you have to import more food, you have to import more fuel to transport and heat and cool the hotels and everything. So you end up actually draining the economy of tons of foreign currency reserves just to support the industry, in addition to all the mainline subsidies that the government provides for food, for fuel, for wages and pensions and so on. So it's a constant race to the bottom when it comes to the market-oriented solutions to helping countries grow and develop and so on. So rethinking tourism, for example, means, number one, if you have food security, if you have renewable energy security, then yes, maybe tourism will become a net benefit for the country. But especially given the ecological crisis that we're facing, it becomes extremely important for a job guarantee program, not just to secure food and renewable energy capabilities, but also transform industries like tourism towards more ecological tourism that's focused not just on kind of the nightclub and beach culture, but more towards cultural heritage preservation and more focus on community development in a more sustainable way, as opposed to the more extractive type of tourism that we usually see. So I'll leave it at this and happy to engage in conversation.
But yeah, thank you very much. I see on the chat that you have a fan club here. And this was actually a very fascinating presentation. And it's a good way to think about it too, of designing these job guarantees in the Global South in support of the Sustainable Development Goals and these targets that were set, but we're not on track to meeting currently. And this is a different way where we can do that. And now, if anyone in the audience would like to ask questions, there's a Q&A feature. I think there's also a raise your hand feature if you'd want to take the floor, or just write any questions you have in the chat. I think that until we see if other people have questions, I can take my privilege as moderator and ask the first question. And I guess here's where I'm gonna go back to my trade union experience and ask, when you think of job guarantees, what is the role that you see for, trade union structures and collective bargaining? Whichever one of you would like to answer.
Maybe we should hear from Laurent or Lukas, since you actually have an experience with the program. What were the discussions like in terms of workers' rights to join a union and so on?
And collective bargaining, because Lukas, you mentioned that the wage for Marienthal was actively bargained.
So maybe then I just start, and Laurent, you come in a minute. Exactly, I think that's the key point for trade unions in a job guarantee, that trade unions have a kind of a dual function in a job guarantee, right? So on the one hand, trade unions are very often pushing for a job guarantee or are in favor supporting it in the idea, later on potentially in the creation and implementation. But then once the job guarantee is operating, trade unions are supposed to represent the workers and not the employer, right? Not the job guarantee provider itself. So that's actually a delicate situation for trade unions, where they also need to take care on the one hand to push for the political ideas that are very important, but on the other hand, continuing to follow a membership logic as well, right? And represent their members and workers' interests, which will be the workers in a job guarantee. So I think that's one consideration that is interesting to be explored further in the future. And actually, that's something that research could look at. In the Marienthal pilot itself, what is essential is that it's a collectively bargained wage. Now, the the wage is bargained at the sectoral level. So it's not bargained at the enterprise level of the job guarantee social enterprise, but it is a wage that is bargained by trade unions with the employer association in the respective sector. So that's one important function for trade unions. I think the other broader objective that trade unions should be focused on, and that's my normative take on it, is that they should take care that jobs and work in the job guarantee maintain to be something voluntary and beneficial to the workers, and not to cross the line that job guarantee programs theoretically could morph into something like a workfare or even forced labor, right? So at some point it's important to draw the line. What is a job guarantee and what is a forced labor or workfare regime, as we have actually in many Western and non-Western countries. Even in many Western countries, right? In Austria, Hungary is very close, and there is a workfare regime for unemployed, and I think it's important to distinguish it to be very different from a job guarantee. And I think trade unions should point out that decent work and should always push strongly that decent work is founded on the 4 pillars of decent work by the ILO, and that is the decent work and employment is available, adequate employment rights, comprehensive social protection, and fourth, social dialogue and labor relation between workers and employers. And I think that's the 4 pillars that the trade unions should orient themselves.
Thank you, Lukas. Lara, the role of trade unions is very important, in particular to guarantee social dialogue in the area and in companies. The unions are invested in local committees. They advise us to succeed, and this is important for well-being at work, quality of work, and access to collective rights. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And just to add a little bit on my side, is I'm also thinking of the job guarantee as setting a floor on rights. If it's done right and following these principles that we presented and that Lukas said of these jobs being decent work, and then it gives, the floor for everything else that unions bargain is above that floor. So you can aim higher otherwise.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in the case of the job guarantee, it's important to recognize that if some of the job guarantee programs are transitioning into mainline public employment, then they should be, should take advantage of all the public employment benefits, including wages and benefits and so on. The other thing to pay attention to, which is a main difference, I guess, between the United States and Europe and most other advanced countries, is that in the US, employment brings you also health insurance and other benefits, whereas in many other countries, those are guaranteed as human rights, so to speak. So the nuances can be challenging in the case of the US because we have this weird system where when you lose employment, you lose all other social benefits and you're kind of on your own. And then finally, the important feature that labor unions can bring to a job guarantee program and hopefully, restore, these are things that we've lost over time, which is apprenticeship programs, because the job guarantee program is meant to be a platform for people to not only have employment and contribute to their communities, but potentially transition and build skills and transition into other areas of the economy, either as self-employed kind of new ventures or into the private sector in general. And this is something that we know for a fact that labor unions in many parts of the world have developed the most successful kind of on-the-job training programs, apprenticeship programs that are the best tools to actually tackle long-term unemployment and unemployability, and especially youth unemployment. And having unions be part of the job guarantee process is critical.
But yeah, thank you for that. I see now that we have a question on, is India's job guarantee a good example that we should emulate in the global north? So maybe one of you can talk a little bit more and remind us all how the program is also structured and say a little bit about it and answer the question.
Happy to start, and then maybe Lukas and Laurent can add. So the reference here is to India's NREGA program, which is the National Rural Employment Program, which is the largest in the world. Its basic feature is that it guarantees employment for 100 days for rural workers in rural areas. So it's not an urban program, although there's a new urban program that's developing now in India. I wouldn't, it's the largest public employment program in the world. I wouldn't exactly call it a job guarantee because it doesn't have some of the features that we've been discussing here, but it does have the potential to actually build on this very successful experience. Number one, the pay is not the living wage pay that we would advocate for. Number two, it only guarantees 100 days of employment, not a true job guarantee. Number three, which is a great feature of the program that actually caused a little bit of stir in the beginning of the launch of the program, but turned out to be one of its strengths, which is the transparency in terms of the implementation of who's managing and where the money goes and so on. That led to sort of a little bit of negative publicity in the beginning of the program, because people said, oh, there's corruption, or these local government agents are not paying the workers. But because the program was introduced with transparency laws that allowed workers actually to discover very early on who's trying to cheat the system, that it actually built resilience for the system. So it's very important for a large-scale program to have transparency requirements and access to information for the public, for the media, for employees themselves, so that you take care of any potential abuse that would jeopardize the program. So to answer the question, is this something that we can learn from the global south and in the global north or any other countries? Absolutely, but the nature of employment obviously will have to be different. What we learned is that when you provide decent work, people will show up and do the work. When you provide decent income, it lifts up communities from poverty, from hunger, from all kinds of things. And this is something that I'm sure Laurent and Lukas can attest to, especially when it comes to the cost of the program. A lot of people think, oh, employing hundreds of millions of people in India is too expensive. But you have to realize that the cost of inaction, the cost of unemployment, is actually much, much higher than the cost of running the program. And especially when you think of the problems we see in the global north in particular. I mean, wouldn't you rather have a youth employment program that inspires kids with career opportunities, introduces them to new technologies, and inspires them with music and theater and technology and all kinds of things through summer programs or any kind of after-school job training programs that are paid and well-funded and well-staffed, or not do that because we think it's too expensive, and then end up dealing with the drug crisis, end up dealing with having to build more prisons and having to deal with all the negative effects of long-term unemployment later on in life. It's a no-brainer. It's the most humane thing to do. It's the most cost-effective thing to do from a purely economic perspective.
For the cost, money is not the issue. Long-term exclusion for employment already costs more than 43 billion euros per year in France. It's too expensive. This amount includes the support to the long-term unemployed, but also health expenditures, for example. It's 35 of loss of revenue, 26% of welfare expenditure, 19% of spending bound to employment, and 20% of inherent cost, social consequences of unemployment in the domains of housing, health, safety, child welfare. The cost of unemployment cover 70% of minimum wage. So it's very important.
Yeah, perhaps just to add very briefly to what Fadhel and Laurent described, I think I agree with that, and that covers all the major points. I just want to add one additional point, and that is that while the Indian program, by far the largest, is important to learn from, as any program, what really divides labor markets in the global north, in high-income countries, and the global south is that in the global north, unemployment is a big problem. In the global south, it's typically informal employment and informality. So while a job guarantee program in the global north needs to aim at improving the working and living conditions of unemployed, target above their level of income and of living conditions, a program in the global south, of course, cannot focus on unemployment because that would only be a fraction of the people that would actually be in need of a job guarantee. But the largest share of people are in informal employment that that the job guarantee provides also an opportunity to integrate into formal employment.
Thank you very much. And now we have another question, which is, given all these pros of national employer of last resort, why are countries not doing it? Any legitimate worries? Is there anyone who wants to start on this one? I can also start and just kind of put in the context that there's a lot of things we should be doing that we're not doing also when it comes to climate and other things. And we've just, for the last decades, been in a system where this idea in policy that, markets are the solution to everything has dominated and kind of kept us away from doing these things. I don't know who of our panelists would like to add anything. Fadhel?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be the same answers that we're used to. Number one, people say the cost is too expensive. It's going to add to the deficit. It's going to add to the national debt. It's going to cause inflation. And I'm happy to answer all these things. I'm just listing all the usual excuses that we use. Number two, it's this ideological belief that the market will find a more effective, efficient way than any government intervention. That's the only sustainable way in the long term to create employment, is to have it done in the private sector. And then the NGOs and charities will take care of the poor, of the unemployed. It's not the government's responsibility to do that. And again, yet another set of excuses. So the job guarantee literature has been very clear from the beginning. Keynesian, post-Keynesian, MMT economists have been very clear that the market, left to its own devices, cannot produce full employment. As a matter of fact, has a natural tendency to create unemployment, and especially structural long-term unemployment. And that's why we need a job guarantee program to undo that problem. And now we have the additional crisis on top of the inequality and unemployment and socioeconomic exclusion crisis. We have a climate crisis. So the nonsensical situation that we have right now is we have millions of people who actually want to work. We have clean technology, green technology that's becoming cheaper by the day and widely available. And then we have the planet is on fire. We have these three problems on the table, and somehow we pretend like we don't have a solution. The job guarantee program is one platform to take millions of people who actually want to work with decent wages and benefits, use the technological capabilities that we have to tackle the climate crisis, and do it in a just, restorative, regenerative way. When it comes to the costs, the arguments that this is inflationary, that it's going to cause a larger national debt, is going to bankrupt the country. This is where the MMT literature has been very helpful in distinguishing between countries that have high degrees of monetary sovereignty, as a result, a larger fiscal policy space, and countries in the global south in particular who have very limited fiscal capacity because of the external debt constraint that I mentioned earlier. So for the global north, it's a no-brainer. They should have job guarantee programs. That should have been the case for decades. But for countries in the global south, as I mentioned earlier, you can't just create any kind of job guarantee program. It has to fit within a transformative policy program that builds on the first key pillars of having an economy. You can't run an economy without food. You can't run an economy without energy. And job guarantee can be the first step in a transformative, comprehensive economic policy program that builds food security, that builds renewable energy capabilities, and transforms the type of manufacturing system that we have in the global south that specializes in low value added content manufacturing, and starts building a different kind of ecosystem for economic development in the private sector, not just in the mainline government sector. So we have the solutions, and the cost should not be a limitation here, because we're paying for it many times over with blood, tears, and money, so to speak, both in the global south and the global north, that the cost of inaction is way too expensive. And with the climate crisis, we shouldn't have any more excuses to tackle these problems simultaneously.
Thank you. And now we have a question for Laurent and Lukas on perspectives, how to expand these pilots you talked about to national level.
Laurent, would you like to start, or should I jump in? Okay. So I start briefly first and then pass over to you. I think actually the question of Mauricio connects very well with the question of Peter from the chat, because one is on just framed negatively, why can't we expand it? The other one, how to expand it more, right? And I think perhaps it's most useful if I just share the experience of the Marienthal Job Guarantee pilot scheme, and then maybe Laurent can also talk about the French TC. CLD scheme and their experiences with the implementation. And I think the experiences may differ in how we got to implement it, and point to different avenues that can be taken to implement such job guarantee projects. Now, in Austria, the situation was the following: that job guarantees have been debated internationally very heatedly in the last years. In Austria, there used to be a large public employment program, actually much larger than our Marienthal Job Guarantee scheme, implemented by one government, shut down the next government, hotly debated on the national political level. And the idea of the public employment service in this case was to take the question of a job guarantee out of the political sphere and try to implement it on a small scale, but therefore with a rigorous academically evaluation of the project, and therefore for us it was also key that we would only engage in the research and evaluation if we were free to publish the results, irrespective of what they mean, and we would not take any money for our involvement of the research, right? So we only do it of our pure academically interest in the project, and of course that we were able to randomize the participants who is treated in what period in time. So all long-term unemployed are eligible, but they receive the offer at different times over the year, and that allows us in the research, from the research perspective, to exploit the variation, to evaluate the causal effects, not only on income, but as I mentioned, also on health, social inclusion, well-being, and so forth. So that also differentiates our small pilot from much larger projects, that we could have this randomization right from the beginning, which allows a causal evaluation of the effects at the end. And I think that's one way forward, right? To come from this technical perspective and set up research projects that allow for that are planned through ex ante before the implementation, which is crucial, and then allow for results that can add to the academic debate and then feed into, of course, and inform the political discourse on job guarantees. Now, the only issue with such a small program as ours is that, of course, no matter how rigorous the design is, how strong the internal validity of the results is, there will always be issues of external validity, meaning, can you extrapolate on other cities? Can you extrapolate on a whole country? Well, of course, you cannot. From trying it out in one town, you cannot say something about a whole country or large cities or even the entire world. So what is important is that more of such research projects are being piloted in different contexts, in different periods in time, in different cities, in different regions, in different countries. And I very much hope so that our pilot can inspire other research projects that can be implemented and therefore allow for more evaluation. And actually, our promising results should really suggest that additional trials in larger settings are needed. And I hope that this is a way that can go forward. Lastly, I also want to say that on the public employment service in Austria, there was involvement of social partners that have all agreed to the implementation of the project, so both employers and trade unions are representatives. And that also results in the specific characteristics of the pilot that I presented, right? So it's not a pilot where I would say this is the ideal normative type how a job guarantee should look like, but that's the result how it turned out in reality with all the constraints and deliberations that could be implemented and that was feasible. And I think in France, I think it was a much longer political process that Laurent led. And so I'd be very curious to hear about that as well.
Thank you, Lukas. In France, an extension of the experiment taking place in at least 50 new territories, minimum, as 2022. Today, the NGO that I shares accompanies new territories in France to prepare them in this regard. Richard Sennett is an American sociologist, says, I know a regime which provides human beings no deep reasons to care about one another cannot long preserve its legitimacy. Taking care of the other, putting human beings at the center of our choices, that is the whole point of this project. So TZCLD is a new job guarantee for the future.
But yeah, thank you very much. I see someone's just letting us know there's preparation for a job guarantee project in Brussels as well, similar to the French one. Since we're now almost at the end, which each of you like to have your final closing 1.5 minute remarks. Let's start with Lukas.
Thank you, Lara. That's difficult now, but I think we covered a lot of ground and it was very engaging to learn from the example from France and also to learn from the ideas for the Global South and what that would mean. And I really enjoyed the discussion. I think this whole conference and today's conference day features several interesting panels on job guarantees. And I'm really glad that we have this exchange. And I think that's very important and actually is a step forward to expanding job guarantee pilot projects, right? We are seeing different pilot projects, a large one in France that is being extended, small one in Austria, some in other countries. And I think that we should go forward in on the political side. There are people who want to promote and engage in discussions on that. And on the research side, on my side, I think I just want to perhaps make the suggestion to the other panelists and to the audience that I think for this whole debate, it's also very important to have the academic research and evaluation accompanying these projects. And so I would really suggest that wherever possible, to involve researchers already from as early as possible onwards, and let them freely research on the topic in order to create more knowledge and findings on this. And I'd be happy to share any experiences or advice on this if anyone's interested. And so that's my suggestion for everyone interested in job guarantees.
Thank you. Laurent?
Well, thank you, Lara. We are volunteers to do this experiment in France, and we need your support to be successful. We must unite our efforts to end this injustice to unemployment. So thank you for your invitation and for your attention.
In closing, I'll just say that the literature on the job guarantee is so rich and dense in terms of preparatory work to what a large-scale job guarantee program would look like. And then the experiments that we've seen in France, in Vienna, and many parts of the world, in India and Argentina and other places, we have plenty of small-scale, medium-sized scale, and large-scale experiments that demonstrate the benefits of the program, that demonstrate that it's not inflationary, that demonstrate that there's a massive need for employment. So I'll close by saying, join this effort via this organization, this wonderful platform that we have this week, decommodifying work, decarbonizing, decolonizing, and most importantly, being prepared and being armed with the literature, with the examples is very important for shifting the narrative, for calling their bluff when they say we don't need the program, or it's going to be inflationary, or it's the market will fix it. So join this organization, join these networks, support them. Make sure you read Pavlina's book. Also, most importantly, Pavlina has a wonderful frequently asked question section on her website that lists all the usual questions about the job guarantee and provides very clear answers that are very important to convince policymakers, convince the public, convince labor unions to join this effort. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us in this network if we can support you, if we can answer any questions. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to all our participants. And it's great to see these practical examples on how in all contexts a job guarantee can help deliver on the goal for decent work for all. And hope that the participants and everyone stays around for the other panels as well. And thank you all again. Have a nice day and happy World Day of Decent Work tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone, for the great discussions. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.